The hubris of the Jedi should never be underestimated. Their order consistently grows stagnant, corrupt, blind to their code through their certainty that they are in the right. You can see it in their actions, and how the consequences of those actions echo across the Force. You can see it in the tale of the Iron Knights, banished and persecuted by the Jedi, who were so assured they were doing the moral thing. Excerpt from Darth Matu's Holocron. The Iron Knights were a reclusive Force order of so-called Force-sensitive droids that were created around 50 BBY. You'll see why I say so-called here in a bit. Their founding was assisted by the Jedi Master Aquinos, but honestly, to understand the Iron Knights, we have to first take a visit to the planet of Orax in the Outer Rim. Orax was only discovered by the Republic in 119 BBY, so it was relatively new to the galactic scene compared to other worlds. The planet was extremely rich in ore and precious stones, covered in loads of ore and towering crystal formations. Some of these crystals, it turns out, were sentient, softly glowing, with pulsing inner light. That's right, folks, sentient crystals, and these crystals were the shards. The shards were able to communicate via electromagnetic waves, and they would grow in clusters. These beings could persist for millennia together, and they did up until the Republic set up a mining colony on their world. The Republic started to mine these crystals, and they were utilizing them as an energy source. The mining efforts, though, were plagued with mishaps and setbacks. Computers would malfunction or display strange messages, machinery would go haywire, and lights would flicker. Rumors started to circulate that the planet was haunted. Finally, though, someone discovered that the electromagnetic frequencies that the shards emitted could be translated into galactic basic, and first contact was made with the shards as a whole. Mining operations immediately ceased, and many of the shards volunteered to be implanted into droid bodies in order to act as ambassadors for their species. Many of them went to Coruscant, and they began to act as representatives in the Galactic Senate. The Jedi would dispatch Jedi Master Aquinos to the world in order to ascertain its importance to the wider Republic. Master Aquinos would discover that some of the shards were Force sensitive, and he would actually engage in a dialogue with them about the Force. The shards are a curious and contemplative species. Conversations with them can take a very long time because of the nature of their electromagnetic signals. Many of the shard councils play out over the course of years. Think like an Entmoot from The Lord of the Rings. Shards in droid bodies, however, are able to interface through the droid shell with binary, and thus they could interact with the rest of the galaxy much the same as other sentient beings. Master Aquinos would ensure that several shards who exhibited Force sensitivity were installed inside droid bodies, and then he would take them on as Jedi Padawans. The shards would take well to Jedi teachings. They were naturally extremely aware creatures, constantly considering their environment. This made them uniquely aware of injustices, and they felt a strong drive towards correcting these issues wherever they found them. The shards proved fascinated by what they viewed as a short-lived but vibrant and thriving physical galaxy. They wanted to protect it and help it grow. Yet, at the same time, these shards were not immune to the predations of the dark side. They found themselves beset by the exact same temptations that any other Force user has to endure, the same allure towards shortcuts and power. After all, what better way is there to face injustice than from a position of strength? Master Aquinos, he recognized this and helped the shards establish deep meditation routines so that they could recognize when the pull of the dark side was present and thus ward off its influence. Meanwhile, while Master Aquinos was training the shards, elsewhere in the galaxy, the Arcanian Dominion was performing vile experiments upon another species known as the Yaka. The Arcanians probably deserve a video of their own one day, but to make a long story short, they were a species that were utterly convinced of their own superiority over other races. They were an advanced society from the colonies region in the very heart of the galaxy, and they had a penchant for cybernetic and genetic modification. They were very open in their experimentation on other species, and the Yaka were a species that at first was considered unsentient until the Arcanians got their hands on them. The Arcanians would install cybernetic brains in the Yaka, as well as make other so-called improvements. These improvements would leave the Yaka with genius-level intellect, but absolutely no emotions, and even a penchant for cruelty. The Galactic Republic was petitioned many times to intervene in the experiments, and they ignored every request. The experiments would continue for centuries, honestly, until just around the time that Master Aquinos was training the Iron Knights. Around that point, tensions exploded into open conflict. Discontents and escaped Arcanian experiments rallied behind the banner of someone named Gorm the Dissolver, who himself was a Yaka, an escaped Arcanian cyborg. They formed the Arcanian Renegades, and they engaged in a bloody and brutal civil war that left the Arcanian Dominion reeling. Gorm proved a brilliant tactician with almost no empathy, and he killed thousands in his war against his former masters. The conflict got so bad that the Dominion was forced to appeal to the Galactic Republic for help, and now the interstellar government would respond. A team of Jedi Knights, including a young Mace Windu, would be dispatched to the system, but even they struggled to turn the tide back in favor of the Arcanian Dominion. Master Aquinos, eager to prove to the Jedi Order that the shards had enormous potential, took his Iron Knights to the colony's region, and he entered the conflict on the side of the Dominion. The Iron Knights quickly turned the tide, proving more than a match for the heavily modified genius Yaka soldiers that had risen up. The Dominion was able to re-establish control over their worlds, and their cyborg soldiers were almost all exterminated, though some of them, like Gorm the Dissolver, would escape and find lives elsewhere in the galaxy as bounty hunters or mercenaries, etc. The Jedi Council, however, did not react the way that Master Aquinos had thought. In fact, they punished him for daring to teach the shards about the living force without their permission, and they banished him from Republic space. He would take many of his Iron Knights to the far-flung Outer Rim world of Dweem, where they would remain isolated from the wider galaxy, hidden away, and it was this fact that actually would save the shards from extinction during the rise of the Empire. Shard ambassadors were all slain during the Jedi Purge, and the Empire landed on Orax in force soon after. Droids, they were outlawed on the surface of the planet. Almost all of the shards were destroyed or mined for use as power sources. The only survivors were the exiled Iron Knights sequestered on their far-flung world in the Outer Rim. They would persist through the rise of the Empire, though they would do so in covert faction. They used their status as so-called droids to infiltrate sensitive areas and still remain hidden. They would sabotage Imperial efforts wherever and whenever they could, and they would prove extremely effective at indirectly fomenting rebellion across the Outer Rim by destroying Imperial garrisons, shutting down their factories, disabling their shield systems, and more. The Iron Knights would persevere for decades on the planet of Dweem until they were eventually rediscovered by Luke Skywalker's new Jedi Order. The Iron Knights were then welcomed wholesale into the new Jedi Order, and they maintained their distinction as an independent organization within the wider Jedi. The Iron Knights actually would serve with distinction during the war against the Yuuzhan Vong. They acted as a kind of dual weapon against the Vong due to the extragalactic invaders' fear of droids and technology, and the fact that these droids happened to be able to use the Force. It made them more than able opponents for Vong warriors. The Iron Knights even persisted after the Vong War, and they would remain firmly entrenched in the Jedi Order ever after, serving among some of the most distinguished Jedi Knights in history. Before we go, I just want to mention, the shards could be installed in any kind of droid body. Many of them did train with lightsabers, and they utilized them as weapons of the Jedi, but they were not restricted to such things, and they were fully capable of utilizing whatever inbuilt weapon systems their droid body had. Each Iron Knight was unique and tailored to whatever their shard's preference was. You could put a shard inside the body of a YVH droid if you wanted to, and boy, if the thought of one of those Terminators running around wielding the Force doesn't scare you, then I don't know what does. Well, that's all I got for you today, guys. This was a look at an extremely esoteric corner of the Star Wars universe. The Iron Knights have always been extremely cool to me. I always thought it was a shame that they didn't get more of the spotlight. They get most of their fleshing out in the tabletop games, and very rarely, if ever, feature directly in any major depicted story arcs. But hey, now you guys know a little bit more about them. I hope you all enjoyed the video, that it satisfied your itch for that deep Star Wars lore. If you did enjoy, please like and subscribe. It really does help the channel out a ton, which in turn helps me to do more of these. But if not, hey, no worries. I'm just grateful you made it this far. Alright guys, until next time, take care of yourselves out there, and as always, may the Force break your chains.